When opportunity meets preparation, that's where the magic happens. Okay, let's do polynomials, cubic polynomials. Right, so when dealing with cubic polynomials, there's 4 types of factorization that you might be familiar with until now. And then we'll add one more to it. Okay, so the first one is a common factor. You know that from grade 9 already. And then grade 12's, the second type will be grouping. So you're familiar with grouping as well. And then sum of 2 cubes. Right, and then you could also get difference of 2 cubes. Right, so those are the types that you're familiar with by now. So sum of and is positive and the difference is negative. So yeah. Right, so we look at the first one and we can see there that we can take out a common factor. So common factor there will be x. So we can take out x as a common factor. And we open a bracket and it's going to give me x squared. Right? Where that comes from is you take x to the power of 3 over x and then you subtract the exponents. And then we take the second term, minus 2x squared over x. That gives me negative 2x. And the last one is 3x, negative 3x actually, divided by x gives me negative 3. And so we substitute our points, or rather our answers there. So it's minus 2x and then minus 3. There we go. Now because you have an exponent to the power of 3, we can at least have 3 brackets. And so we factorize the trinomial again. It's going to give me x minus 3 and then x plus 1. Because if you simplify the coefficient in the brackets, it must give me the negative term, the middle term, which is negative 2. Right, so let's go to the next one. Is it a common factor type of factorization? Is it grouping? Is it the sum of 2 cubes? Or is it the difference of 2 cubes? Now, which one do we think it is? Let's do the deduction. It can't be common factor because there's no common factor across. It is grouping. Right, so we split it in 2. And then we take the common factor of the front part there. So that's going to give me x squared, open bracket, what's left is x, plus 2. So that's if you divide each term by the common factor. So our common factor on the right is negative 9. Right, so we take negative 9x over negative 9. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so we cancel out the 9's. That's how we get x there. Okay. Then we take negative 18, put it over negative 9, and then if our answer is positive 2, it's x plus 2. Now we know from previous grades that when brackets are repeated, we write it down once. So x plus 2. There we go. And we take the coefficients and we put it in the second bracket. So minus 9. So now you can further factorize the bracket on the right. So it's difference between 2 squares. And so now we're going to have x plus 2. And then we can have x. So remember your signs in the 2 brackets must be different. X minus 3, the other one x plus 3. Here we go. And that is our answer there, rather, to factorize the cubic polynomial. Now we get to another 2 types. And now here you need to decide which type of factorization this will make use of. The sum of is positive and difference of 2 squares will be a negative. So in between the 2 terms there, is it positive or negative? So it's positive, so it will therefore be a sum of 2 cubes type of factorization. Right, so I do this for my students so that they can see where the numbers come from and it's not just taken out of thin air. So I cube root the first term, then I cube root the second term. So the values in the first bracket is cube roots of the initial expression. And because there's a positive in the middle, we keep the positive sign. So now we open another bracket for 3 terms. Now x times what gives me x to the power of 3? X squared. Here we go. And then the last term, 3 times 9 gives me 27. And so because we have a positive here in the first bracket, our middle term will be negative. So we take x times 3 gives me 3x plus 9. There we go. And that's a factorizing the sum of 2 cubes. Now this is the difference of 2 cubes, the next one. And so now it's going to be the cube root of 125 is 5x there. And then the cube root of 8 is 2. Because it's a minus, we keep the minus sign. And so now 5 times what gives me 125? So 25x squared. And then 2 times 4 gives me 8. So 4 as a constant term. And now because it's a negative in the bracket, our middle term will be positive. And so now we'll just say 5x times 2 gives me 10x. It gives me 10x, and there we go. Bob's your uncle. Right, on to the next. Right, I'll do the second one, and then you can do the first one. But we first have to do the second one, I need to rewrite it as 4 terms. So I'm going to have a placeholder there, and we're missing the x to the power of 2 part. So it's going to be 0x squared, which basically doesn't add anything, but I just want the structure of it. Okay. And there we go. So now we're going to test to see what factor can actually give me 0. So this factor theorem is basically us trial and erroring to see what factor can give us 0. So now we start by 1, we substitute 1, and we get an answer. We get an answer of -4, so that does not work. And so now we trial and error again. We use 2. So this is new to you, and so basically it's just using factor theorem where we use values and substitute it. Now let's see, do we get 0 now? So when you put that whole part in a calculator, do you actually get 0? Right, so here, there we go. We got 0 when we put everything in our calculator. And so that is our factor. Therefore, x is equal to 2 is our factor. But now we want to put it in a bracket. So we take the 2 to the left. It's going to be x minus 2 equal to 0. And therefore, we can put it in a bracket. Now, that's our factor, right? And now we look at our expression there, the one where we added a placeholder. So x times x squared gives me x to the power of 3. Then -2 times 1 gives me the last constant term there. Right, now we need to get the middle term. So we take -2, we plus times it with x, that gives me a -2x. So what do I need to add to this to give me 0? So I have to add positive 2x, and the value I need to add becomes my middle term. Right, and there we go. But remember the reason why we don't write 2x squared in the middle, because we need a trinomial, and so therefore we only write 2x. Because we have a 3 as an exponent, we need to have 3 brackets. So it's going to give me x plus 1 and x plus 1. There we go. And then we can actually write it differently. We can say x minus 2. And then x plus 1, because the bracket is repeated, we can write it to the power of 2. And there we go. That's how easy it is. Right, on to the next. So now here, remember, before we even start, we always check which type of factorization we can use to basically solve the cubic polynomial. But now in this case, we actually want to get answers, because the question is asking solve for x. So now we need to solve x. So let's do that. So now there's many ways that we can do it. We can use common factor, we can use grouping, we can use sum of, we can use difference of. So there's many ways. So now when we look at this, we can't use a common factor. It is not the sum of, it's not the difference of. We could use a factor, the factor theorem, and we can use grouping. So I think grouping would be very easier to do apply. So let's use grouping. Okay, so we split it into two. The left hand side, we're going to split it into two, and then our common factor is x squared, and then in a bracket would be x plus 1, and then negative 16 will be our common factor on the right, and then it will give us x plus 1. Negative 16 divided by negative 16 is 1. And so we write, brackets are repeated, we write it down once, x squared minus 16 equals to 0. Right, so now we can further factorize. X squared minus 16 is a perfect square, two perfect squares, and that gives me an x minus 4, and the other bracket will be x plus 4 equals to 0. Now my 4's are written quite weird, so it might look like a 6 at times, but just know it is a 4. Don't get it twisted. Right, and then x plus 4 equals to 0. So now we take the value over, and then that will be our answer. X equals to negative 1, or x is equal to 4, or x is equal to negative 4. And now it looks like a 6, yeah. Okay, then the next one, you can pause the video here and then try this second one on the right. Okay, so when you look at the second one on the right, is it common factor? It's actually factor theorem. So we can use factor theorem here. Okay, so now we're first going to transpose everything to the left hand side. Minus 5x plus 6 equals to 0. And now we're going to use the factor theorem to actually find the value of the first bracket, right? So we're going to substitute 1. You can always start by 1, or you can start by negative 1. It doesn't really matter, as long as you keep on checking until you get a value that perfectly fits this one. And here we see that 1 is our factor, so it's going to be, we want to put it in the bracket, so it's going to be x minus 1 equals to 0. And so we're going to put it in brackets, in a bracket, x minus 1. And now we're going to open another bracket that has 3 terms. So remember, the first term, x times x squared, is going to give me x to the power of 3. And then negative 1 times negative 6 gives me positive 6 there. Once we have that sorted, we are basically halfway done. Now we need to get the middle term. It must add up to the value of negative 2x squared. So currently we have negative 1x squared. What do we need to add to that to give us negative 2x squared? Obviously going to be negative 1x squared. And there we go. And so we're going to have negative x as our middle term. And now we have a trinomial in the second bracket, and we can further factorize that. So we're going to write down the first bracket, which is x minus 1. And then we can factorize this. Now this is baby stuff by now. You guys are quite good at factorization by now. So it's going to be x minus 3 and x plus 2. And so we write it down. X minus 1 equals to 0. Now you don't have to do all of this as a grade 12 learner. I'm just showing this to people that wants an understanding of why we do certain things. That gives me x is equal to 1, x is equal to 3, and then x is equal to negative 2. And there we go. And so that's how you do it. If you have any questions, post it in the comments.